I'm going to do a quick tutorial on how to make monofilament eyes, and a couple of variables just to consider. One is the thickness of the line, so you can go anywhere from, I'd say, 12 pounds monofilament up to what I have in the vise, and this is a 50 pound. And then also, I typically do these with just the pliers to help me control, and you can adjust how far apart the eyes are set. If you hold it towards the tip, you'll have very narrow eyes, and then the further down in the jaws you go, the wider set the eyes will be. In addition to the thickness of the line, you can determine the shape and the size of the eyes by how much material you leave off either side. Since this is a pretty heavy line that I'm going to use here, I don't need much line off, so I'm just going to trim this just a little bit. I've got it centered in my jaws, but again, you can use your pliers, and I typically do, and then just apply some heat to it. So I'll just take my lighter, and as it begins to melt, you can see it'll start to make that ball shape. If it drips at all or starts to drip, you can just spin your vise or manipulate your jaws on your pliers to help compensate for that. This stuff cools really quickly, so in a matter of a second or two, it's cool enough to touch. And then I can just flip it around in my vise and just do the same thing on the other side. So just add some heat to it. And then you can see again, it doesn't take long before this is cool to the touch. It also takes a Sharpie pretty well, so if you wanted to do different colored eyes, you can just come back through, and if I want these to be orange, you can just add some coloring to it, and again it takes pretty well. So that's one example. The other thing that I've been messing with is using glass beads to help make different colored eyes and just a little bit more dimension to them. So now I've dropped my line to a 20 pound monofilament, and this is a blue Stren. And again, I'll just repeat the process. I've added 2 green glass beads to this, and what will happen here is as I melt the line, it'll adhere to the glass beads, and it'll create a little bump just like it did with the other eyes, but it'll help keep that in place. So now you can start to experiment with what color beads you want to use to get these different color variations. And also there's a lot of high-vis line out there, so if you use a yellow line, it'll have a different dimension to the eye as well, so you can do 2 different colors. So you could do like a red bead with yellow eyes, etc. So something to play around with. So I'll show you how this works. Again, just put it in my vise, and I'll just melt down the end until it gets to the bead, and then again you can see that little extra bump there, and so now it's melted into the bead. It'll hold in place there, and I can just flip it around and do the same thing to the other side. And that's it. So now you've got glass beads on either side, and those are just craft store beads that I use, but I think it just makes for some really cool eyes. So something to experiment and play around with. So now I'll take those eyes that I made and tie them into a damselfly pattern. And so I'm starting off with a size 10, and that's actually a hopper hook, but you can use a curved nymph hook, something that just has a little bit more overall length than a standard nymph hook. The thread that I'm going to use is an 8/0, and this is in an olive dun. So I'll just get that started here in the front, and I'll tie off or cut off the tag end, and then I'll just bring my thread to about a 1/4 inch or so behind the eye of the hook. And now I can take my eyes that I made, and I'll just set those on top and tie those in. And just a couple of X-wraps. We'll get them in nice and snug, and then I'll just move my thread down to about the point in the hook, and now I can add in some additional weight. So I'll just take some wraps of lead here and I'll move it up to just behind the eye, break off either end, and then I'll just take a couple of wraps up through and back down just to make sure that everything's in there nice and tight. The tail for this is going to be a marabou, and so I've taken a plume of olive marabou and I'm just going to weed out some of the pieces on the bottom, and I'll hold it all together so I get an idea of what my volume is going to look like when it's tied in. And I want this to be about a hook shank in length, so I'll just switch hands and tie it in right behind the lead, and I'll bring it down to about the barb and the hook. And now I can tie in my rib, and for that I'm just going to use a brassy sized copper wire. And so I've cut off maybe a 3-inch section or so, and I'll tie this into the side. And the body that I'm going to use is an ostrich herl, and so I'll take off a piece and I'll tie that into the side as well. Just going to trim the end here so that it's nice and easy to tie in. And then I'll bring my thread up to about maybe a 1/4 inch behind the eyes that I tied in. So now I can just take my wraps of ostrich and just side by side I'll wrap them up until I get to the thread, and then I'll tie it off and clip the excess. And now you can reverse wrap the rib if you want, but I'm going to take aggressive enough angles that it's going to do a good job to protect and secure that ostrich, so I'm not going to reverse wrap this. I'll take it up again until it meets the thread, and then I'll tie it off and then just break this off. Now the back that I'm going to use is turkey, and this is dyed in an olive, so I'll cut off a section and I'm going to trim towards the tip just so that I have a nice even tie-in spot, and I'll hold this right on top and tie it in. And now I can start to dub the thorax and the head, and for that I'm going to use an olive dubbing, and this is a hairtron dubbing, so it's a combination of natural hairs dubbing, and then it also has some antron in it to give it a little flash. So I'll take off just a little bit here just to get it started, and I'll just dub this in. And once I've created kind of my first pass, then I'm going to tie in some legs, and for that I'm going to use an olive pheasant tail, And I'm just going to take off maybe 4 fibers or so per side, and I'm just going to tie these in. And I'll repeat the process on the other side. And now I can go back to dubbing, so I'll take that same material and just finish out the head. And so take some more wraps behind the eye. And when I get to the eye, then I just want to make sure that I cover it as well, so I'm going to do some figure 8 wraps. And I'm going to leave the thread behind the eyes here. I'm just going to clean up some of this. Sometimes the antron can get a little bit unruly. So just clean up some of these. And then I'm going to fold my turkey over top and make sure that I've spread it out a little bit. And I'm just going to take one wrap, maybe 2 wraps behind the eye, and then I'll bring my thread up to the hook. I'm just going to adjust my hook here slightly. So I brought it up to the eye of the hook, and now I'm just going to tie it off. So a couple wraps on top and underneath. And now I can trim this. And now I'll just finish tying those sections down, and then I can put in a couple of whip finishes. And I'll trim that. And I'm just going to put 1 drop of head cement here on the threads, keep everything nice and tight. And if you've got any of those wild antron fibers, just clip them. At this point, you can pick out that dubbing a little on the front here to give it some more volume and to kind of blend the thorax and the body once it's wet. And that is my Damselfly Nymph.